Vice Provost at Iowa State, and on behalf of the university, I want to welcome you to the 10th installment of this year's Institute on World Affairs. The series is titled Outside Looking In, International Perspectives on U.S. Foreign Policy. I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you that there are upcoming programs and many flyers over there on the table, particularly with respect to the rest of this series. And also, I want to remind people that Tuesday is the second presidential lecture that will be given by Diane Burt, and the title is Cancer Preventable? So look for that in the sunroom here at 8 p.m. on Tuesday, the February 3rd. The speaker will present his talk, and there will be perhaps some opportunity for questions, and I believe afterwards there will be also an opportunity to stay around for a few minutes and chat with him. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce a student in pre-veterinary medicine who is the president of the Hillel organization at Iowa State University, Catherine Harber, who will introduce our distinguished speaker tonight.
Good evening. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of ISU Hillel. Tonight's speaker, Consul General Moshe Ram, is with the Israeli Consulate in Chicago. A member of the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs since 1975, he served as the Foreign Ministry's Director of the Economic Division for Asian, Pacific, and Latin American Affairs. He also served as Consul General of Israel in Shanghai, Deputy Consul General to the Southwestern United States in Los Angeles, First Secretary at the Embassy of Israel in Manila, Philippines, and Second Secretary to the Embassy of Israel in Kathmandu, Nepal. He was born in Haifa, Israel, and earned a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science and Middle Eastern Studies from Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Mr. Ram offers us a unique perspective on an issue that is very important to many of us. Please welcome Consul General Moshe Ram.
Thank you very much indeed. It's a pleasure really to give me the opportunity and the place to share some of our perspective with this very distinguished crowd. I think that I'm so happy. I mean, always when I speak in front of students, because I am the only one who is really dressed properly. Everyone is so kind of sport, stylish and casual. So it's very, very nice. I mean, to see you all, and I hope that besides, I have to applaud you for braving the weather and coming to hear. At least I need to speak, so I need to come, but you to hear me. It's very nice of you to come, and I hope that we will have the opportunity to share some information, to share with you some of our perspective, and you need to understand that I am representing a government. As much as I am representing a government, I'll try to have some of the ideas that are a little broader. We are not parrots, and we do not always say exactly what the government says. So I'll try to be a more kind of informative and try to give you some other perspectives. Today was another sad day for Israel and for the people in Israel. And this has become almost a habit in which 10 innocent people who went on a bus on the way to work, on the way to school, on the way to the kindergarten, 10 of them were brutally murdered, and more than 50 people were injured. And this is something that we Israelis, unfortunately, had to live with for so many years, because terror and the phenomena of terror in the Middle East did not start 3 years ago. The terror in the Middle East is more than a century old. And this is the story of the Middle East. Indeed, the last 3 years in which the Palestinians embarked on an orchestrated campaign of terror directed against innocent people, claimed already the life of more than 900 Israelis and more than 2,000 Palestinians. I'm saying Israelis and Palestinians, and it is important to understand, because as much as we have brothers and sisters and families, they have too. However, it needs to be emphasized that the orchestrated campaign of terror started for a very obvious reason. And the reason was to try to force Israel to do something which the Palestinians were not able to gain around a negotiation table. And this was a great mistake. Because if you look at the history and you see the way that we negotiated with Egypt, the way that we negotiated with Jordan, always, whenever we were challenged around a negotiation table, we showed flexibility and we were able to develop and to cultivate any kind of confidence. Whenever Israel was challenged in the military field, we won because we didn't have any other option. So the Palestinians, even now, 3 years after 900 Israelis and many more injured, and 2,500 Palestinians, they still believe that the way to submit, the way that Israel should submit is by force. Let me tell you, I'm trying to use. How long can I speak? I mean, usually, how long does it take? I mean,
50 minutes, an hour at most.
And then questions. Okay, I'll try to be as brief as I can so that I give you enough time for questions. I'd like to go a little bit, and then I'll go back to the issue of the Palestinians, which is the core of the conflict between us and the Arab world. In it, there were wars with Egypt and with Jordan and with Syria. But the core of the problem is the fact that there are two people who claim, I would say, a property on a land. And I think that in 1947, when the UN adopted the partition plan, it was exactly the time in which there was a Jewish state and a Palestinian state. The Jews accepted it, Palestinians did not, and the rest is history. I'll get back to this one because I want to go to a different issue which will incorporate the dealing with the whole issue of terror. I think that what has happened, what the part of the Arab world or part of the Muslim world understood, that you really do not need a weapon of mass destruction. You don't need a bomb, you don't need a chemical bomb, you don't need a biological bomb. What you need to do is to turn a human body into a weapon of mass destruction. And that's exactly what happened 2.5 years ago here in this country. All of a sudden, using the human body, which was something of a tactical nature, has become a tool of strategic nature. because, as I say, there is, I don't want to get into the definition of terror. I think we know exactly what is terror all about. But the fact of the matter is that with a simple method, with an explosive belt, or with an explosive bag, you are gaining so much power. You gain so much power, and you can paralyze a country only with a threat that one or two or no one infiltrated into, and the whole country is going crazy. So what I'm trying to say is that basically, and this was something that the Arab world discovered, is that the human body is right now a weapon of mass destruction. The fact of the matter is that this is a tool in which, in Israel, for example, I mean, for the last 3 years, I don't want to come with the figures because the figures are staggering, really. I mean, the fact is that so many of them were able to explode, many more of them. The attempts were preempted, and it is very difficult to say that a country can go on a routine, a daily behavior with such with such a phenomena. It's not easy, my friends. It's not easy, and I know that people who were in Israel, there is a feeling that we are going on our same routine. And lately, luckily, because of nothing that was done by the Palestinians, by the way, I mean, as far as preventive measure goes, the Palestinians did not prevent even one case of suicide bombing. There were, luckily and fortunately, for the last few months, the scattered suicide bombing can be attributed to the fact that our security organizations are having good intelligence, they know exactly what is going to happen, and they stop the potential suicide bomber when they are still in Jenin or in Nablus or in Ramallah or in Bethlehem. This is the fact of the matter. And when we are discussing some of the issues, and for me it's something that I just cannot understand, that when a country is building a fence, anti-terrorist fence, all of a sudden the country is being put or being blamed for erecting a fence and protecting the life of its people. So all of a sudden, the victims are those who are being blamed for. And the whole issue is just unbelievable. It's really ironic. I mean, has been proven already that with a security fence, and it's not a wall and it's not a barrier wall, it is a security fence for security reasons. And people would come and say, yes, you confiscate land and territories, and you do this and you do that. And I say, sometimes yes. Yes, that's true. But this is something that can be reversed, because I call it the Arafat fence. Because had the Palestinian been serious and fighting terror as they were supposed to fight terror since, let's say, since 1993, when Yasser Arafat, after signing the agreement with the late Prime Minister Rabin, came back into the territories and According to the agreement, it was first and foremost, we supplied them with guns. We supplied them with weapons to take care of the Palestinian fundamentalist organization. This was exactly the nature of the Oslo. And unfortunately, again, I mean, from the beginning, and I tell you that my feeling is that Israel has to be blamed too for it, because we felt, after 1993, we felt that already this is the day of the Messiah, because since the conflict between us and Palestinians was always the core of the issue, we are about to solve the problem. And we, my generation, people who fought 2 or 3 wars, we felt that that's it, because we are now coming and solving the problem, and then we will live peacefully together forever. It turned that our dreams or our illusions were a little premature. And basically, we did not see too much of a change within the Palestinian, and eventually what happened is that if you do not insert any kind of authority, of course, Hamas, Jihad, other rejectionist organizations are taking care, or there is no vacuum. They are coming inside and filling up the gap. And this is the fact of the matter. We still believe that the solution for the problems in the Middle East and the problem between us and the Palestinians is the formula 2 states for 2 people. This is the formula, and I think that many Israelis, or the majority of Israelis today, would agree or would support it, because on both sides, always on both sides, there are the extremists, people who would like to see the greater Palestine, or people who like to see the greater Israel. But mostly, on both sides, people would like to live peacefully together. And the fact of the matter is that when you talk about a security fence or anti-terrorist fence, it was partly a big push from the Israeli public. The Israeli public came to the government and told them, listen, we are sick and tired of getting killed on a daily basis. You should do something to protect us. You should do something to protect us. And if you look at it, in areas in which the fence is already there are less attempts, and it is easier to prevent and to preempt suicide bombers coming into Israel. It's much, much easier. What we see today, and I think that people, all over, people are really, all over the world, and I can see it from an American perspective, that there is a lot of fatigue, and people are really tired from the conflict in the Middle East. I think you see less coverage in the newspapers, especially when America is so much tied in the war in Iraq. Major suicide bombing, which used to have a lot of coverage, whether in the electronic media or in the written media, are relegated to second or third page. We see, that there is fatigue about the conflict, especially now when the president and the administration are so much into the campaign for the election for president in 2004. So when we look at the overall picture, and when we look at our local picture, our local scene between us and the Palestinians, we feel that since 1965, 66, 67, there is a lack of leadership within the Palestinian Authority, what used to be a PLO, but later on the Palestinian Authority. When we talk about leader, the caliber of Anwar Sadat or a caliber of King Hussein, we're able to look straight at the eyes of the people and tell them, listen, we need to make difficult decisions. And Anwar Sadat understood in 1973, when the end of the war, Yom Kippur War, when we were 100 kilometers from Cairo, that time Anwar Sadat understood that this is the time to start to negotiate with Israel. And indeed, it took 6-7 years. 1979 was the agreement, peace agreement between us and Egypt. And since 1979, I can hardly remember one incident in which an Israeli soldier was killed on a front between us and Egypt. This is the nature of peace. And people would say this is a cold peace. They do not really recognize you. The intellectuals are not coming to Israel. The lawyers are not are hating you. I mean, what is important is that people live on both sides and they do not kill each other. This is what is important. And when we look at the overall perspective of our conflict between us, not only with the Palestinians, because with the Palestinians, I can assure you, sooner or later, we will live together, whether it will be peaceful coexistence or they will be on one side of the fence, we will be on the other side of the fence. By the way, I think that when 1993, when the big dream came into almost reality, a new Middle East with new economy, Israel and Palestine, basically, I don't feel that this is the best idea. I think that there is a lot that we can do for the Palestinians. We can help them. We can afford them with access to port and harbors. I'm not sure that this is a good idea that the Palestinian economy would rely on Israeli economy, because there is so much disparity between the two economies. If Israel, I mean, we have close to 17,000 per capita GDP, the Palestinians have lower than this one. So what is essential is to try to see how the Palestinian economy can get connected to the Egyptian economy, to the Jordanian economy, to the Syrian economy. I don't think that it will be a good idea, because eventually what will be, we will create, one will be the hard worker, the other one will be the master. This was just another observation. When we talk on the global or on the regional arena, there is a big problem. The regional arena is much more complicated today, as far as I can see it, as the local arena. Syria, Iran, and Hezbollah. Three major components of instability in the Middle East. Look at Iran. And the way that Iran is trying to export the revolution into the Middle East. Iran, through Syria, is keeping the Hezbollah on our northern border, which is a constant threat to the whole of the north of Israel. I don't think that there are many countries in the world who would sustain such a threat. A sovereign country, Lebanon, which does not have an army on its front with Israel, and keeping there a militia, or do not prevent a militia from standing or occupying the borderline between Lebanon and Israel. And if you ask me, I didn't see too many or too much in the press relating to the fact that Lebanon is a country which is occupied by Syria for the last 30-something years, since 1975. We don't see too much about this one, and I think this is something that the world should understand really what is happening there. Going back to Iran, Iran is a threat because Iran is now very close to gain a nuclear capability. Very close. And I don't think that this is the role of Israel, even though Iran, the only country that did not, or that Iran excluded from giving aid when the quake took so many lives in Iran, was Israel. So it is something that the world community need to understand, that it is not something that only Israel should do, as we did in 1981 with the nuclear reactor in Iraq. This is incumbent upon the international community to understand that by giving Iran the nuclear capability, it's not only a threat to Israel, but it is a threat to the stability of the whole Middle East. As much as fighting terror, and this is fighting terror too, I mean, whether it is nuclear terror or whatever, it is not only one country which suffers from terror. And many terror incidents are not connected and not related at all to Israel. So it should be understood that Europe, for example, which sometimes is looking at this kind of terror, I wouldn't say favorably, but I mean, they say it's not our stuff. We don't have to deal with it, because eventually it will hurt them too at the end of the day, because it doesn't matter whether it's in Bali or in Kenya or in Australia or in America or in Europe. If there is no commitment by the international community to fight terror, this is a phenomena that is so malignant, and it will spread on and on and on. We always were in the forefront of terror. Always in the forefront of terror, whether it was in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s, when we sent our aircraft to risk hijack, Air France hijack Jews and non-Jews alike. So it was always part of the way that we behave. Two more comments, and then I will go for. I'll ask you. I give you some time for questions. What is? I mean, when we look at the issues, that are between us and our neighbors, the Palestinians, and again, I'm going to the local arena in which there are so many issues. I mean, the issue of Jerusalem, the issue of settlements, the issue of right of return. The one who really touched upon such issue, because those issues were never touched. Everyone waited to the end of the conflict, to touch them. The one who did it was really Ehud Barak. Ehud Barak, Prime Minister Barak, who really went into these issues, and he felt that this is the time to solve them. Probably he was wrong. I think that the right of return is one of the most complicated issues between us and the Palestinians. And if we believe all that Israel should be a Jewish state and should maintain a Jewish majority, there is no right of return in any case. The Palestinians are going to have their own land. They're going to get their own country. So once you had your own country, and then on the other hand, you like to have a right of return to another country. This is something that no way. You have your own country, you can establish your own, whatever you want to do. You cannot claim a right of return to another country. You have one. Secondly, the issue of settlement. And I think this is an issue which I don't feel, or with good will, can be solved. We said many times that many of the settlements in any given peace treaty or peace agreement, many of the settlement will be dismantled. Because, there is no use to have settlements in a place in which you cannot guard them or you cannot control them. On the other hand, the proposal was that most of, or three major blocks of settlements will remain in our hand, and for the land, it will be compensated in Israel. Three major blocks of settlement, and then there will be a swap, and they will get a land to compensate for the land of the settlements. Thirdly, Jerusalem. I think that a lot of creativity regarding the status of Jerusalem, whether to have on top to have Muslim sovereignty, underneath to have an Israeli sovereignty. There is a lot of issues, that can be worked out one way or the other. So the major issues are still three. They should be solved in any given peace agreement between us and the Palestinians. The time is short. That's what the Prime Minister said not too long ago. The time is very short. And if we won't see any movement on the side of the Palestinians to implement the roadmap and basically to fight terror, because this is the fact of the matter, to fight terror. Because terror, as much as is bad for the Israelis, it is bad for the Palestinians themselves. They need to understand it. They need to, and you hear voices in the Palestinian street which would go against terror, and it is quite risky for them to say it. But they do understand, and you can hear the voices of mothers and fathers of suicide bombers that were sent by Hamas and Jihad Islam, and rejecting the fact that their sons and their daughters were sent to be suicide bombers, to get killed and to kill as many people as possible in this process. So you can hear the voices. You can hear the voices in the Arab world. You can hear the voices in Gaza and in the West Bank. But still, the voices are not strong enough, are not influential enough to change the course of the policy. Let me conclude by saying there are no saints in this conflict. I think that Israel, and I have to admit, we made mistakes along the road. I think that because of the nature, or because we were for so many years secluded, we missed opportunities. We missed opportunities in the 60s. We missed opportunity in the 70s. We missed opportunities. We need to admit, that there were mistakes were made, and we need to learn from history how not to repeat this kind of mistakes in the future. However, it should be understood that without a genuine and strong leadership in the Palestinian side, there won't be any potential solution. Because whenever there is a vacuum, or whenever the Palestinian Authority is not able to get or to insert its power, there will be always Hamas, Jihad, and other organizations who will take over. So at the end of the day, I cannot tell you, and I'm sure that you are not going out here with the notion that I'm rather optimistic or pessimistic about the situation, because in the Middle East, it's difficult. You need to understand that it is very difficult to predict. Predictions are doomed. Whatever prediction you made, you might be wrong. I think time will tell whether we will find the way to live together, or we will need to live side by side. They will be on one side of the fence. They will be on the other side of the fence. Thank you very much.
How long would you like to?
As long as it takes.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your talk, because you sound like an Israeli with someone such as I, a Palestinian, I can talk to. You started your speech by saying that violence, terrorism, if you will, has existed in the Middle East for many, many years. It isn't recent, right? Is that true? Then you said in the Sadat and Rabin handshake was in 1973.
No.
19 when?
1993. Arafat and Rabin.
All right. No, I want to go back to Sadat. Sadat and
Begin.
Begin.
1977,
All right.
79.
70s. And when that happened, Sadat was killed, right?
He was killed a few years later.
Right. And there was nothing that anyone in his own government could do to stop it, evidently, because he's gone.
Okay.
And that is true in Israel as well. Begin also was killed. Not Begin, who? Rabin. I don't even, can't get it straight. All right, but in other words, what I'm saying is, the question, I'm coming to that. Give me a chance. Okay, so in Egypt, a leader was killed, a good leader that we look at as a good leader, and a good leader in Israel was killed, and no one could stop it. Then you said in 1992, you had an agreement with Arafat, and you gave him weapons. What for? If you are aware that violence has been in the Middle East since the beginning of time, why in God's name would you or the Americans start fighting terrorism with more terrorism? And I would love to hear your definition of terrorism.
1 minute. Let me go one by one. The fact of the matter is that we supply the Palestinians with weapons was to fight that the Palestinians themselves will be able to fight Hamas and Jihad Islam. Listen, you might not agree with it, but this is the fact of the matter. I mean, the fact of the matter was that always in the Palestinian society, there were always the factions who objected any kind of coexistence or agreement with Israel.
And that's not true in Israel?
1 minute, they objected. I don't know if it's true in Israel or not, but you asked a question and I'm trying to answer your question. You asked why weapons were supplied, and I'm telling you that weapons were supplied to the Palestinian Authority to fight Hamas, Jihad Islam, and all the fundamentalists who didn't want to engage in any kind of process with Israel. This was the fact of the matter. What can I tell you? I mean, this is history. This is the story. That's it.
But wouldn't being nice help? Instead of giving weapons? I mean, why weapons? Why encourage the fight?
What would we give them? Flowers? I mean, what? I mean, no. You're talking from a perspective of Midwest, and I do not blame you. I mean, things in the Midwest are a little different than in the Middle East. What to do? Middle East, that's right, they are very, very much different. And in the Middle East, what to do? People using some other means and tools to bridge the differences. And part of it is they're using sometimes gun too. Look at the Arab world. I mean, you know that in 1970, Hussein kicked and killed thousands of Palestinians. In Syria, Assad killed thousands of Syrians. I mean, it is, I wouldn't say it's a common practice. I wouldn't go so far, but this is sometimes the way that the Middle East operates. What to do? So at this point, we felt that in order that Yasser Arafat and the Palestinian Authority can fight or can go against Hamas and Jihad Islam, they need weapons and not flowers. Yes. Who is giving? I don't want to be the bad guy. Who is giving the?
You want me to do
Yeah, why not?
Yes.
As a student, I know I'm younger and I don't really know as much history.
Yeah.
I appreciate you coming here. I think that leaving here I'll know a lot more. But I think what we need to think about is innocent people are waking up every day scared for their lives. And that's the bottom line. I mean, fortunate enough, I can wake up, walk to class, and not worry about having to be killed. And I can go to sleep in my dorm room, as small as it may be. But that's the principle of the matter. And America's done that. And I think we need to do all that we can to help. Because even if it is to give them weapons, I mean, desperate times sometimes call for desperate measures. And I'd like to thank you again.
I agree with you. Listen.
Want to come to the...
Yeah, this is a question about the Iran stuff you were talking about before.
About?
Iran. Yeah, and recently there's been a lot of demonstrations against the theocracy there, and it looks like they're weakening in some ways. Perhaps a more liberal government's going to take shape, or a de-revolution. Do you think it's necessary for the United States or Israel to intervene in Iran and change things, or do you think it will eventually evolve into a good state on its own?
Yeah, I think that the last point.
Do you think that Iran? Do you think that it's necessary for the U.S. to, put pressure and embargoes on it, and perhaps even war, such as with Iraq? Or do you think that Iran will, basically, the people will get rid of the government on their own?
Listen, I'm really not an expert on Iranian matters, but I can provide you with some thought about it. Firstly, I don't think that this is only the problem of America to try to pressure Iran. We know, for example, that Russia is very much involved in the nuclear program of Iran too, supplying them with a lot of stuff. I mean, sometimes it's become such a commercial and economical matter that they are really risking other issues. I mean, because they feel that with the way that they can export or they can trade with Iran, they can gain some commercial and trade benefit. This is the main problem. I think that this is important that the international community will understand what are the risks of Iran having a nuclear bomb. This is the matter, the fact of the matter. And I think that, as I say, it's not only a matter of one country to do the job. It's a UN, it's a other organization that can be of any help on this issue. So thanks.
Don't you think that also basically the sort of violence